Welcome to Motherhood. Whether you're 18 or 80, Dr. Christina Hibbert, clinical psychologist, author, and mother of 6, is here to help you through the ups and downs, the joys and frustrations, the new information from experts, and the stories of happiness and heartbreak from real moms. Remember, if you can, tell your mama to listen too.
And I'll make everything all right.
Here's Christy.
Welcome to Motherhood. It's me, Dr. Christina Hibbert, here to help you overcome, to become, and to flourish in this sometimes punch-packing experience we call motherhood. Now, I know that's kind of an interesting term I'm using, but you'll understand why I'm using that in a minute, because sometimes our experience of motherhood does pack a punch and does knock us down and does make us struggle and have a lot of hard times and experiences. And if you're a mom, and most of you are listening, you know what I'm talking about. But today we're going to specifically talk about the hardship of when postpartum packs a punch. And that's the title of a new book by our guest today. We'll introduce her in just a moment. But we're going to be talking today about some of those punches that come from postpartum, and specifically, what are some things that we can do? What do we need to know about that? How can we help ourselves? How can we help those we love? And, how can we hopefully heal from, and not only heal from, but I like to say grow through, instead of just going through the experiences that we face postpartum and then on into motherhood, because that's only the beginning, as we know. It's just the gateway into all the other punches that are going to come later in life. So it kind of sets the stage, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we introduce our guest, I just want to thank you for joining us on Motherhood Radio. As you know, you can go to my website, drchristinahibbert.com, for lots of resources, especially on the things we're talking about today. We talk about postpartum depression and anxiety and mood disorders quite often on the show, not only because it's so common, but because it's something that I've been very focused on in my work for many, many years. So you can find a lot of free resources through my website on all the things we'll be talking about today, including a link for my video that is now free online, which is called Postpartum Couples. So that's for moms and dads to talk about what's going on. It's a great tool for you to use. You can go and access that online and watch it as a couple, or watch it for therapy, or whatever you need to do. Use it for education. That's a great resource as well. And of course, if you haven't already, join our Facebook group. It's Growing Through Motherhood on Facebook. Just go and find it, ask to be added, and of course we'll add you. And that's a great place to get all the updates on the new episodes and some of the other conversation and connection that we have going on there. And of course, you can find us anywhere online as well, motherhood.tv on Instagram, and Dr. Christina Hibbert on Instagram, and on Twitter. You can find us all over the place. So be sure to connect with us so we can stay in touch, and so I can know what you want to know about on Motherhood Radio here. So as I said, we're going to be talking about when postpartum packs a punch. And again, that's the title of a brand new book we'll be talking about in just a moment. I was thinking about how common it is. And I think most of us, before you become a parent, especially if you don't experience postpartum depression, you really have no idea what's coming emotionally. But the truth is that 80% of us are going to experience some changes in our emotions when we have a baby. And it's better if we're prepared for that. And for those who've already had babies, and maybe like me that are later in life, it's great for us to help them prepare our children, our friends, our family for those changes that come. In fact, a friend of mine, her daughter had a baby just the other day, my friend's first granddaughter. And I did not hesitate to say, congratulations, and make sure your daughter knows that if she has any postpartum depression or symptoms, that she calls me. So I'm here to help. I understand. So it's good for us to just say the words and get it out there, because if it doesn't happen, then great. But if it does happen, then at least we know that somebody understands. Because for me, when I was first going through postpartum depression, I tried to reach out. With my first son, he's almost 21 years. I can't even believe that, but 21 years ago, I knew I had depression. I had a degree in psychology. I knew that something was wrong. I didn't know a lot about postpartum depression, but I reached out to my doctor, and I called my doctor and I said, I didn't actually talk to my doctor though. I talked to the nurse and I said, can you please tell my doctor that I think I have postpartum depression. And they called me back later and she said, the doctor says to tell you that it's normal, it's fine. We're going to send you a brochure in the mail. And they sent me a brochure about the baby blues. And that was that. And I felt like, okay, maybe it's just me. Maybe, I mean, this is definitely, as I'm reading this brochure, I'm thinking, I'm definitely feeling worse than this. All I wanted was somebody to just say, I know what you're going through. I even tried to call my aunt, who is not much older than me and actually has kids about my kids' ages, and tried to kind of, in a roundabout way, try to see if she understood what I was talking about, but I was embarrassed, so I didn't want to say it straight up. And I felt like even she didn't get it. So, this is something really important for us to talk about. The more we talk about it, the more we can help others. And because it's so common, not only that 80%, but 1 in 5 will experience postpartum depression. And in fact, throughout our lifespan, anxiety is the most common issue. And that can be really common in postpartum as well. About 10% of moms with anxiety disorders, 6% with post-traumatic stress disorders. And throughout our lifespan, anxiety is the most common issue. About 1 in 3 of us will have an anxiety disorder in our lifetime. So these are things we need to keep talking about. That's why we keep bringing it up on the show. And today we have a fabulous expert here. I'm so excited to get to talk to her about her new book and about all that she's learned on her journey. So let me welcome our guest, Christina Cowan. Welcome to Motherhood, Christina.
Hi, Christy. Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's so good to have you here. And what I'm so excited about your book. You contacted me, gosh, when was it? A while ago. You've been working on this a long time, right?
Yeah, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago.
Wow.
When we first talked. Yep.
Yeah. So I got to talk with her and share a little input for her book. But now the book is out, When Postpartum Packs a Punch. I love that title. And that's why I'm using it. And there's a copy. If anybody is watching the video, you can see the cover. So cute. I love it, with little boxing gloves, right? Because that's kind of what we're trying to do, is box our way out of it, right?
Right. Yep, that's the idea.
I love it. Okay, so let me introduce you a little bit, and then we will jump in and learn more about you and about the book and talk about this. So Christina actually started writing when she was only 5 years old. I love that. And eventually that landed her at Northwestern University. My dad went to dental school there, so we are familiar with that. And she studied twice. First, she received her bachelor's degree in speech and later a master's degree in journalism. So she has 20 years of experience as a writer and editor. And for the last 5 years, as I said, it's been taking a while. It takes a while to write a book. And she's been working on this book for the past 5 years. And now it's out. When Postpartum Packs a Punch, Fighting Back and Finding Joy. You can find out more about Christina and her book. And also, I have to say, she's also a mom. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Chicago. And you can find out more about her and her book on her website, Christina with a K, K-R, Christina Cowan, COWAN.com. You can also find her on her Facebook author page, which is facebook.com/Cowan, again with a C, Christina Cowan, Christina with a K. And you can also find her on Twitter at Christina Cowan. And be sure to check all those out. You can also find her book, When Postpartum Packs a Punch, on Amazon, if you want to check it out that way. So great. First of all, how old are your kids?
My daughter just turned 6 and my son is 8.5.
Oh, how fun.
So
right in the middle there, right in the school age years.
Yeah, it's like a sweet spot now that you can have real conversations with both of them.
Right, and they're not teenagers yet, so you are in a sweet spot.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
so awesome. Well, great. So you started, really what drove you to write this book was your own personal experience. You're a journalist and you're a writer. And what I love about the book is that it is research-based, and you talked to so many people and you gathered so much information. The journalist in you came out and did that so well, but you also share the personal experience. So why don't you just tell a little bit about your personal experience that drove you to write this book? Because I'm sure a lot of moms listening can relate.
Sure. So I had postpartum after my son was born in 2009. He was my first.
Yeah.
I had classic postpartum depression, but I'll back up a little and say that what triggered it was a traumatic birth with Noah, my son. So the pregnancy was fine. The birth ended up being traumatic because of a forceps intervention. I didn't even realize that they still used forceps. I thought they were salad tongs, but they were these huge, huge things, and when I had been in labor all day, and it was traumatic, to have them use those. And then it worked, fortunately, but he came out and he had, bruises, and I was severely injured from the forceps.
Oh, gosh.
So I had a bad tear, but the doctors didn't say anything about any of that. I thought, well, okay, this is standard. It's fine. I left the hospital actually early. They made me leave a little earlier than we had planned. And then when I went home, I got very sick and I couldn't go to the bathroom. So I ended up back in the ER because of the tear and, all of the injuries. So I thought I was going to die, and I ended up having to have all sorts of things done. And I eventually got better within about 10 days, physically better.
Right.
But when all of that was done, the sort of mental fog had descended, and I felt guilty because of the birth. I felt like my body had failed. I felt like I shouldn't have had a child because, he was bruised. I mean, he healed immediately from the forceps, but, when you have your first child, you have these perfect ideas, and any failure, can be tantamount to a disaster. At least for me it was, because I'm kind of a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So then I started crying. I kept thinking about the birth and what could I have done better? What should I have done? And then I had these intrusive images come. And then I thought, when those came, I thought, boy, I'm the devil.
Yeah.
Can't stop crying. And I have visions of the baby flying out the window, just like Brooke Shields. And I thought, this can't be happening. Like, it can't happen to every woman. Mm-hmm. No one would have kids, but none of my friends had talked about it.
Yeah.
Until I started talking and sharing things. And I didn't keep quiet. I let everybody know I was crying and I felt horrible. And that was the beginning of my healing. And then I told my OB within a couple of weeks, and she helped me get on some antidepressants. I was hesitant about those, but I took them, and within 10 days I stopped crying.
Yeah.
And I went off after 4 months. So and then I saw a talk therapist, and all of that helped. So within 4 to 6 months, I was feeling really good.
Mm-hmm. And thank goodness you got help so fast. I mean, a lot of women don't get help that fast. So
right.
That's a strength of yours that you did that.
Yeah, I see that now. At the time, I thought, well, I have to. I can't deal with this and a baby.
Right, of course.
I'm not engineered to deal with both. But when I went through the research for the book, and I interviewed so many women who had kept quiet for years, some of them, and I thought, I don't know how you do it, and you have more than one child and you're going through it and you're stuffing down the depression or the anxiety or both. I just couldn't do that. So, but as I was going through it and as I was healing, I thought, I really would like to have something to read, not the medical stuff so much. There's plenty of that out there. Yeah. But I wanted some compassion, and I'm a reader and a writer, and I couldn't find a book that spoke to me on my level, not as a doctor or an OB. So I thought, well, I could write some stories. And then as I talked to women, I thought, well, maybe I could do a book. And then, I committed to it. And I felt called to it, to give women and dads, there's a chapter in there for dads, a resource. Yeah. Back to what you were saying at the beginning, to keep talking about it and looking for someone who has been there and says, I understand, and you're not crazy. Right. That's all. That's the beginning of sunlight, I think. And we all need that hope. So
absolutely. And that goes to what I was saying at the beginning about my experience. I just wanted someone to say that you're not alone and you're not crazy. This happens and it's okay and you'll get through it. Just that can be so powerful. Like you say, it can really turn things around for you.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've written a book that can do that, which is great. And by speaking up, and I think your point earlier too is important to emphasize, is that once you start sharing and opening up, other people come out of the woodwork. I mean, and I find that too, because this has kind of been a specialty of mine for so long. When people hear I specialize in postpartum, all of a sudden I start hearing all these stories that I wouldn't otherwise hear, because they know that it's okay to say them. So I think once we start sharing and opening up a little bit, you start to see, gosh, not only are you not alone, but you really, really are not alone. There are a lot of women who experience all kinds of different things similar to what you've gone through.
Yeah, it normalizes it, you know, which what you want. When I had the intrusive images, I shared them, you know, because I wanted someone to say, it's okay. Like, I've had things come into my head like that too. And as soon as I heard someone say that, you know, I had a friend who said, oh, when I had my baby, she lived in a high rise. I didn't go on the balcony because I was afraid. What if I slipped, or what if he fell, or what if I threw him? Even though she never had any intention of doing that. And I said, exactly.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Someone can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important. And gosh, what you went through. I mean, the other important point is you said the doctors all acted like this was no big deal. And that's an important point to emphasize with birth trauma, is that it doesn't have to be a big deal to anybody but you. I mean, if you're scared, you think you're going to die, if it's painful, if it injures you, whatever it might be a normal quote unquote procedure to everybody else in the room or everybody else working with you, but it's how you perceive it. And that is traumatic. My goodness.
Yeah. No, that's right. I actually redesigned the book as I was writing it to focus on trauma first in the second chapter, and to say there that trauma is kind of woven throughout postpartum depression because, you know, you might have a traumatic birth or previous trauma. I had lost my mom when I was young. So when you know, I knew that the grief from that would resurface when my son was born somehow. I didn't know I was going to have postpartum depression, but I had those layers, the trauma and her loss and not having her there. You know, that was kind of a perfect storm for postpartum depression.
For sure. And it can bring all that up. I mean, you're going to miss your mom when you're going through that. And there is a lot of loss associated with not only if you have, especially if you have a traumatic birth or any kind of traumatic experience around the birth, but also just there's loss involved in having a baby. It seems so paradoxical, and a lot of people don't understand that. But, you know, losing your freedom or your identity or your, you know, your attractiveness, even your body. Yeah. Sleep, for sure.
Sleep, everything. Yeah. You lose your whole identity that you were, the person you were before, you change overnight. And that was hard for me to get my mind around, along with all the other stuff. But no one said to me, you know, not my OB. And when my OB saw me after and she helped me, she said, well, I didn't think this would happen to you because you were so happy and positive, and you had no one with a history of depression at that point in your family. And I didn't, but I don't think you have to, you know, it can happen to anyone.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And that's so interesting too, because you hear that a lot, like, well, but you seem so put together or so on the ball or so whatever. So why did this happen to you? But it doesn't mean that you're not put together or that you're not on the ball or that you're not happy or whatever. It's just this thing has happened and it's changed you. And you're going to emotionally respond to that. Your body reacts to that, you know, what you go through. So let's talk about trauma. I love how you put that at the beginning of the book, because I think a lot of books put that just later, kind of as an addition. Oh, by the way, you can also have a traumatic childbirth. But it often is the first experience of motherhood, trauma, birth trauma, whatever it might be. I mean, just having a baby can be just traumatic anyway. Labor and delivery is quite the process. And we just are supposed to just, you know, it's supposed to just be normal and fine. And we're supposed to bounce right back. And these are all myths, of course. But talk to us a little bit about what you learned about trauma and how much that plays a role in postpartum and motherhood mental health.
Sure. So when I went through everything with Noah, I didn't know it was trauma. I just thought it was awful and it should never happen again. And as I started to talk to people, you know, they said, you could sue that, you know, hospital for making you leave early, and you went through a lot. And as I processed it, I thought it was traumatic. I would never have sued the hospital. But I thought it really was trauma. So I was interested in that thread. And I talked to other women who had maybe an unplanned C-section, which was traumatic for them, but they never spoke up, or a vacuum extraction, which can be traumatic, or the baby goes to the NICU. And all of these things, as I started interviewing and talking to people, so many things are traumatic for women.
Right.
And often the doctors don't see it that way because it's not their lived experience. They might be in the room, but they might say, oh, a C-section, that's standard. I had 5 of those today. You know? But they're not thinking, wow, a C-section, that's an intervention. if it's unplanned, and it might affect her mental health. So let's check in with her after.
Right. Yeah.
And just see. So, and then for the dads too, as I interviewed some dads and I talked to Mark Williams over in the UK, it was traumatic for him, and it sent him spiraling into his own battle with depression, seeing his wife have trauma. So it can be traumatic for dads as well.
Sure.
So all of those things factor in, but we don't take the time, I think, especially in the United States and the Western world, to say, this was an awful thing. We don't want to equate something terrible with childbirth, because childbirth can be terrible. Your first time or your second or third. It doesn't mean it's also a wonderful thing, but it's hard for us to wrap our minds around those two things coexisting.
Right. It's a paradox, but it is true. It's a real truth. We kind of have to accept both because they are both real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I experienced it and then I researched it, and researching it helped me heal mentally from it, and thinking, I forgive myself, and all the forms of treatment that are out there, like EMDR, to help women through therapy, and all the things that I'm sure you use and know about that help women heal from these traumatic episodes with birth or in their past, like I said, with losing my mom.
Right.
How that factors in, and allowing them to say, this was the worst thing that happened to me, or one of the worst, and then to move past it,
Mm-hmm.
So
that's so important. And I appreciate you bringing that up, and also bringing up how it can impact dads and partners, because of course, when the one that you love is, seriously ill, maybe going to die. I mean, there's some really crazy, scary things that happen. That's going to affect everybody around her too. So often it's not just mom, it's the whole family is in shock because of how the birth went or the trauma that experienced. And then in addition to that, there's all the other things that can happen around the same time. You might have a perfectly, quote, normal, fine, happy childbirth experience. But for instance, my sister, when she died, it was 4 weeks to the day that I gave birth. So, I had a great birth experience, but I had just lost my brother-in-law and sister-in-law and inherited 2 nephews. So, to me, and it wasn't for months later that I was in therapy. And one day I went, I've been traumatized. This is trauma, And no wonder that the social worker came to my room in the hospital and was trying to check on me and see if I was doing okay. I was still in shock, but, so there's all these other things, like you say, loss and grief and death. And I had a client whose mother was severely ill, had a heart attack, and she was 8 months pregnant, and she was so stressed about not being able to go see her that sent her into labor. And then she had a difficult labor and delivery. And so even that was trauma, just that she couldn't be there, and her mom almost died when she was going into labor. So there are just so many ways that we do experience it. I think it's way more common than we give credit to. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize that you said was that you could forgive yourself, which is so interesting, because you'd think that you could forgive the hospital for releasing you early or the doctor for using the forceps. But tell us about that, because I think everybody can relate to that, having to forgive ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest portion of all of this, because I even now will look back at pictures of my son when he was, 0 to 6 weeks, and my daughter. I had no postpartum anything with my daughter. Great experience with her. I got to really enjoy her.
Mm-hmm.
And I did get to enjoy him, but for those first 6 weeks, it was so difficult for me, and I still look back and wish I had been happier.
Yeah.
I don't feel as much guilt now as I did initially, but I would say it took me probably until my daughter was born 2.5 years later, that I really came full circle and forgave myself and said, and as I was researching the book, that really kind of topped off the forgiveness, that these things happen and it wasn't my fault. And I did the best that I could with what I had, and my body didn't fail. He's here. He's healthy. He's great. And
right.
he has no memory of any of it.
Yay. Yeah.
It's right. I mean, it's all here. And it's, it's really just lies that we tell ourselves, because, we hold ourselves to these unfair ideals of perfection that we're not supposed to make anyway,
Right.
So it took a long time to get there. And, I have forgiven myself for the choices I thought at the time were bad choices.
Yeah.
But you have to go through some sort of therapy or realization to reach that point, and it takes time.
Yeah. That's so important. And I'm so glad that you're talking about this because I know everybody out there, I know so many of you can relate to this. We just recently had a show on mom guilt, just in general, and how hard we are on ourselves. But especially when you're postpartum, it's like the time you are supposed to be, you're becoming a mother and you're so ready to be on and you want to be at your best. And then when you're not at your best, when you're depressed, when you're traumatized, when you're going through grief, whatever it might be, anxiety, you do feel like you are failing or you're weak or something.
Yep.
But like you said, that's not the truth. That's not the reality. That's just in our head how we see it. It's our perception. Right. And hopefully we can, learn about this. And like you said, learning about this and how common these things are and how this does happen can hopefully help us all to realize that, we're not weak. It's just, these are things that we have to go through and we have gone through them or grown through them. And that's the strength right there.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does make you stronger. I mean, sometimes you think, boy, that's cliche, you go through this painful thing, but pain has a purpose. Mm-hmm. And if you can recycle it into something, you're stronger through the whole process. It sounds so strange, and it's the opposite of what we're raised to think. I think in the United States, we're raised to think often, just, deal with it and, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and especially with mental health, because you can look fine. So you are fine. You have no outward appearance of being sick. So what's wrong with you? And your baby looks good. So keep going.
Yeah.
Or, you look like the mom in the commercials who, she's so happy and everything's great and the baby's floating, and that's not real for anybody I know.
I know. Just puts more pressure on us all. We're supposed to look like that. And then in social media too, you've got the beautiful baby photos and everything seems perfect for these moms, or beautiful pregnancy photos. And then you feel like your reality is so the opposite of that. But remember, everybody, that's not necessarily reality. I literally have clients who post all the time, I love my husband, pictures of them, and they're in serious couples counseling because they're about to get divorced. I mean, really, seriously. So we have to remember that, the media and all the things we see, it's not real, and it's okay to have hard times and to feel a little messy and all of that, and just get some help. That's where the strength comes in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you mentioned about dads, and that's always been a topic I've been close to. I did my dissertation and produced this video, Postpartum Couples, when I was graduating from graduate school, on dads and moms and the couples relationship. So let's talk a little bit about just dads. I just want to touch on that a little bit more. You mentioned a little bit, but as you said, dads can get postpartum depression or anxiety or traumatized. I think it's estimated that about 11% of dads in the U.S. have postpartum depression, and that doesn't mean that they'll always admit it or get help, but it is more common than we think. So what have you learned about dads dealing with postpartum issues?
Well, I wanted to do a chapter on men because as I was writing and researching, people said, what will you have in there for dads? Will you have anything for men specific? Because men as a gender go through things differently than women. So they're going to think one way. If their wife is has depression, they're going to approach it as a man. So I thought maybe I should do something. And I found Mark Williams, as I mentioned him, over in the UK, and he is a wonderful advocate for dads and families. And, his whole thing is that men experience depression and anxiety differently, and they socialize differently. So we won't know as women that they're necessarily suffering. So they need to be treated in their own way and cared for in the way that will help them most, I guess. Mm-hmm. And when he started talking to other dads, one thing he said that I thought was really interesting was that you can't stand face to face. Like women want to socialize this way, like face to face. Men want to stand side by side. So they're looking out at the world and not look. But when he did that, he drew more men into these circles to help. And he's formed a number of different groups over there in Wales and the UK to help men explicitly.
Wow.
And the things he has talked about is standing side by side.
I love that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's so perfect.
I never thought about that, but if I ever see my husband talking to friends, they're always side by side.
That's true. They're watching a game. They're looking out at the view. They're whatever. That is so true. That's so interesting.
So that's just a snippet, but his experience was, watching his wife go through a traumatic delivery with their son, and he was worried that they both would die, and that triggered a series of he was depressed, but didn't really get the help he needed then and sort of stuffed it down. And then several years later, I think it was his grandfather was ill. It all came back up to the surface. And so then he sought help and realized it was really stifled postpartum. He calls it postnatal depression.
Right.
That's the term over there.
Right.
But he stuffed it down, and now he goes all around Europe, and I know he's come to the U.S. advocating for men and also for families, like treating the family, because if a dad is depressed, or if a mom, the partner is much more likely to suffer as well, and the whole family.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's true even if you're not in the postpartum period. If you have one parent who's struggling with mental health, the whole family suffers.
Yes.
So I sort of approached the chapter for men that way, and I included some other dads who didn't have it but helped, how they helped their wives successfully.
Right, because there's both sides. There's the dads might experience it themselves, or they just have to experience it going through. So, I always share that when I produced my video and did my dissertation and everything. Of course, I had 2 little kids when I was doing this in graduate school, and I had postpartum with both. And after I graduated, I showed the video at a Postpartum Support International conference, and everybody started talking. It was the first time they started talking. It was the first time they ever talked about dads. And we all were talking in this room about dads' experience and how so many of the women there who were advocates had never talked to their husbands about what it was like for them. And then I had to raise my hand and say, you know what? I didn't even ask my husband, and I produced the video that we're talking about right now. So it wasn't until then that I went home and said, what was it like for you? And he just kind of said, well, it pretty much sucked. I mean, what do you want me to say? Not a man of many words. But it's really important to talk to them about how they're doing and to make sure they're getting support, because as you said, not only can they have it, not only do they need to help us through things and be supportive of us, but it is common for couples to be depressed together. And like you said, like with you being traumatized, then your partner is going to be more likely to be have some kind of mental health or emotional issues if that's what's going on. So and 2 depressed parents is really not a good situation for the kids, right? So
yeah. It's very hard for them, and even if they're too little to know it, it affects all sorts of things with their cognition and learning and emotional attachment and all that stuff.
And that's another great thing about you, like for instance, you getting help so soon. And for everybody listening, this is a great tip, and not only a tip, but a highly encouraged suggestion. Definitely do this. As soon as you know something's wrong, reach out for help. I know it's not easy, but the sooner you do that, the less you're going to have to suffer, and the less everybody's going to have to suffer. And truly, for men, the most common trigger for them to develop depression is having a depressed partner. So when his wife or a girlfriend or partner is depressed, that's the thing that's going to be most likely to make him then become depressed. So you can see where if we get well, we can also prevent other things from happening to our partners or our family, our children, our parents, everybody else who loves us too. So no pressure. It's just that, that's hopefully encouragement to reach out and get some help. Like you said, you knew you couldn't handle all this and take care of a baby, so you reached out. And I think everybody can learn from that. It's not weakness.
No, it's strength to do it, because you have to go outside your comfort zone. You have to tell people. I didn't want to tell a therapist I was having aversions to forks and sharp objects, but I thought, what's the worst? She's gonna look at me funny, or she didn't though.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, that's good.
No,
you found someone good. Yeah.
She said, I've had lots of other clients who've had that, it's
right.
common, you have to stop beating yourself up. So I told everybody and didn't hide it. I realized not everybody's as comfortable doing that, but find 1 or 2 people, if it's a therapist or, your mom, or maybe it's not your family, maybe it's friends. Sometimes friends are better than family,
That's right.
less judgmental, right?
That's right.
Less pressure. Find one or two people and they will help you get what you need. I know it. And now we have so many more resources even than 8 years ago when my son was born, far more resources now, and people who understand and want to help, really.
Yes. Yeah, and the best resource I can suggest is Postpartum Support International's website, which is postpartum.net, because you can go to their map and find where you are in the world. And they have coordinators in every state in the United States, but also around the world in 50 some odd countries. That's somebody who's been through this and is near you and can help you find local resources. So, a lot of people are afraid to reach out because they don't want to get that person who's not going to understand. And yes, unfortunately, that does happen. You might try to find somebody who just doesn't know about these disorders and they really don't get it. But the important part is to keep looking until you find the person that is saying the things that feel right to you and helpful to you.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. and what the U.S. is kind of doing to help care for parents that are struggling with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and how that compares to some other countries. Because you mentioned, the UK, and we just talked about Postpartum Support International being around the world. How does it kind of stack up, I guess? What's going on here?
Well, the United States is trying to do good things. I'm not trying to condemn my own country. I love America.
Yes.
But I've always been interested in what Europe does in terms of healthcare. And as I interviewed some families, one from London and then Mark in Wales, about their experiences with postnatal depression. And one mom had psychosis. She lived in London. And she had wonderful care at this mother and baby unit in South London, at the Chani Kumar mother and baby unit in South London. So I talked to her. I talked to her husband. I talked to the head of the MBU unit. Wonderful people, and how they care for women there, women who have the most severe forms of postnatal depression. So it's not that everybody has access to these services, but just the way they reach out to the people in the communities, and they have, I don't know if they're midwives or caregivers who go out to certain regions of London, and they try to check in with moms and see how they're doing. And then if they find them depressed or anxious, they bring them in. And this one mom, Lindsay, was in that MBU for 3 months with her son, and she had psychosis. And she said it was in that MBU where she was with some other women. Some of them didn't even speak her language and didn't speak English. She felt the most at home, and like she learned the most about motherhood there, because she was free to say how she was feeling. She was getting the care and support and the nurturing. Now, we don't have anything quite at that level because of just the way the U.S. is set up legally. Overnight units like that where the mom and the baby can come in and stay for 3 months.
Yeah, that's amazing.
For free because of their healthcare
For
system.
free, yeah, that's amazing. Wow.
They pay in taxes, but we do have some facilities. So as I talked with them, I thought I'm going to write a chapter on comparing the U.S. and other countries. The U.S. had started, I think the day hospital in Rhode Island was the first one in 2000. It's the women's, and I don't want to, I have to look in the book, but it's in Rhode Island, and it started in 2000. They modeled kind of after Europe, but they're a day hospital, and they do wonderful work there. And then there's the facility in North Carolina, and now there's a bunch more. I have in the chapter a list of all the facilities. We have a couple that are overnight. The baby can't stay, but the baby is often close by with family.
Yeah,
but
that's
the mom can stay overnight. And then we have the outpatient facilities as well. And I think since I wrote the book, like 2 or 3 more opened, maybe in New Jersey. And don't quote me on that, but I know a couple of new centers have opened. One in New York City, I know. So just dedicated to postpartum depression and perinatal mood disorders. So because of our legal system, they can't bring in the babies and health insurance and all that overnight.
Right.
They'd have to treat them as individual patients.
Right.
And the focus is on the mom. But Europe has a much longer history with this stuff than we do. They started the MBUs after World War II in the 1940s.
Wow.
we're a little late to the game.
Yes, I know.
It's not like we don't have like it hasn't gone on here.
Yeah,
You know,
right. Absolutely.
certainly women in the U.S. had postpartum depression in the 1940s and before.
Right.
Just the way we have approached it, I think, is a little bit archaic, maybe. You know, we've really laid stigma on ourselves and others so heavily when it comes to mental illness. And it's the worst when you're a new mom because you're supposed to be, like we've talked about, this wonderful vision of perfection and happiness. So I think these centers are in the U.S. that have opened are going a long way to helping reduce the stigma. We're just a huge country, and that's not enough. I think we should have one in every major metropolitan area.
That would be ideal. And you're right. I do feel like it's really boomed. I've been doing this work for, 20 years-ish. And it's come so far since then. So many, back then we didn't even have really any good books, or there was definitely no online anything. So it's come so far. And there are now not only these like clinics or resources for moms who have the severe mental illness, which is growing and hopefully going to just keep booming because they start seeing what other people are doing and everybody wants to keep up, which is a good thing. But also so much more education for those who are working in the trenches one-on-one day-to-day, the physicians and mental health providers and therapists, so that when you do try to reach out for help for any kind of issue, that hopefully you can find somebody near you that's educated and that understands. That's a great thing that's finally coming along. But you're right, it's been very slow here.
Yeah.
I find that everywhere. I'm actually working on a book right now on essential oils to help in postpartum. And everybody keeps saying, is there any research? And it's like, well, yeah, there is so much research, but it's from all these other countries. You know, we just now are finally doing some research in the United States, but all these other countries have been doing this for a long time. And this is no exception here.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, before we kind of wrap up, you touched on stigma, and that's such a huge issue. I think this kind of brings us full circle back to not only to, having the right kind of help and how long it's taken to make the progress we've made in the United States and that we're still working to make, but also how hard we are on ourselves. I mean, I love the way you said it. You said, that we kind of put that on ourselves. We put that shame on ourselves, over the years. And I think, and we still do, we just still do, even though we're educated, we moms are just the hardest on ourselves. And there is a real thing called a stigma, but then I think we also buy into it and put it on ourselves.
Yep, we do. Yeah. I think it's one of the biggest hurdles we have, especially, I know people in the UK have said they have stigma to beat over there too. The US is different, and we have our own brand of it. I think we have Hollywood, right? So Hollywood feeds us images, and that, I grew up with it. Most people grew up with that. Yeah. That's in the back of your head. You can't get away from that. So you just have to deal with it, and move through life kind of turning down the volume on that, especially as you move into things like motherhood. And I think women are hard on themselves, way harder than we need to be. And we need to be more forgiving of ourselves and each other. And, we're human.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not perfect. We fail. I tell my kids now, they're old enough to understand, I fail at least 20 times a day on things, but I keep going. I make mistakes, but I have successes in other ways. And so I've learned from my failures more. Just like with my kids, I learned way more from Noah's birth, so that when I moved into my daughter's birth, I was so educated. And why was I educated? Because of everything that went wrong. Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have known any of that.
No, I would have had no clue about anything. So I wouldn't have changed it. And the stigma, I didn't feel, fortunately, my family was good and my friends were good. So I had a pretty good experience. I didn't feel much stigma. I was a little afraid to tell people I was on antidepressants, but pretty soon I was saying, it's great, take it if you need to, It
definitely help. That is for sure. When you need it, and it works.
Yeah, it's amazing. I didn't believe it before. I thought, well, that's only if I'm weak will I take that. But I was amazed at how much it helped me, So I interviewed women in the book, though, who did feel the stigma so much so that they did not seek help and they got worse.
Yes.
And that's the worst case scenario. You really don't want to be stifled by something that shouldn't even be there anyway.
Oh, no.
You know?
I know. And that's the tragedy, is when you are trying to maybe say something's not right and then you don't have that support. And you're right. You're lucky that it, like you said, anybody who has a supportive family or community or whatever, faith community, whatever it might be, is very fortunate. We just did an episode this week on culture and stigma and trying to get help, and how sometimes it's your own family that's preventing that, saying, you know what, we don't do that. We're tough, we're strong, or this is our family's culture. And, or it might be your, you know, your ethnic or religious background or something like that, that might say, you know what, that's weak if we do that. So it's a lot to fight. But like you said before, think really hard, because for everybody out there, I know you have somebody that you could probably talk to, or at least try. And it might even seem like the most random person that you just know through your kid's school or something. I mean, really, but that's the person that you think they actually might understand it. Or I know that they went through this, so maybe I'm going to talk to them and they might know something that that can help me. And somebody's got to be there for you. But it can be really hard when you're struggling with all this and you have to then overcome these stigmas that then you, like you said, we've taken it in and kind of put it into our own heads that we're weak if we have to do that.
Yeah. It can often be bigger in our heads than it is in reality.
Yeah.
That's why talking about it is, it's airing your dirty laundry, Yeah. Because you manufacture it in your head so that it's far worse. And then when you say it and you get feedback from someone, you think, oh, well, it's really not that bad, or it's not that big, or it's normal.
Yes.
You need that. We need community of some sort. And even if it's one other person.
Absolutely. I think that is really a great point, and pretty much where we're going to wrap up. So we need community. I mean, if there's one thing that you think we maybe haven't touched on, or something that we have that you want to leave with everybody about either your experience or what you would want them to know about dealing with perinatal mental health issues, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I would just go back to getting help early. That was the biggest thing for me. And at the time of your baby, is that infancy is so short. Mm-hmm. And we always say it to each other now, the days are long, but the years are short. You never get that time back. So if you're feeling horrible, it won't last forever. It's not permanent. There's help. Ask as soon as you can and find that one or two people that will help you, because you'll get better and then you can enjoy the baby. Yeah. And love that time. As difficult as the time is, you can love it because you can't ever get back.
And it goes so fast. It really does.
Yes, in a blink.
Yeah. Well, that is wonderful advice to wrap up on. And I will add that I'm sure Christina feels the same that I do, that if you really feel like you have no one who understands, you could reach out to us. And we would be happy to try to help you find some resources in your area. Because we both understand, that's for sure.
Definitely.
And we've been through it, and we've come through better on the other side. So yeah, as cheesy as it sounds, we have definitely grown through these challenges, and now we want to help others. So right. I love the work that you're doing. I love the book. And everybody, again, it's When Postpartum Packs a Punch, Fighting Back and Finding Joy. You can find it on Amazon. You can also go to Christina's website, Christina with a K, Cowan, COWAN.com. Or same thing, Cowan Christina on Facebook. You can find her there, as well as on Twitter, Christina Cowan. Thank you again for being here and sharing all your experiences and so much wisdom today.
Sure. Thank you. It was great. I love being here.
Me too. Love having you, and love having all of you out there. So glad that you join us each week here on Motherhood Radio to grow through motherhood together. And I hope you will visit Christina's website. Go to my website, drchristinahibbert.com, for more resources. And you can find that link on the homepage for the Postpartum Couples video that's free for you to check out, as well as lots of other things that can help you through your postpartum experience and on into motherhood. And until next week, everybody, I hope you don't just have a good week. I hope you make a good week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.